How do you see the people around you? A friendly face, a trusted student, a mentor? Now imagine the unthinkable. What if that same familiar face harbored something dark, something sinister, something deadly? That was the chilling reality on October 22, 2013, when Colleen Ritzer, a beloved teacher at Danvers High School, walked into a classroom for what she thought was just another day. She had no idea that one of her students was watching her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash a nightmare that would haunt the school forever. Colleen had dedicated her life to shaping young minds, but she never could have imagined that one of them, a quiet, seemingly normal 14-year-old boy, was about to take hers in the most brutal way imaginable. Colleen's story isn't just a crime, it's a wake-up call. A reminder that danger doesn't always come from the shadows. It can come from right inside the walls of our schools. Why did he do it? What pushed this teenager from an ordinary student to a cold-blooded murderer? And perhaps the most terrifying question of all, could something like this happen again? Welcome to True Crime Acts, where we look into the hidden truths behind some of the most chilling real-life events. Our mission is to uncover the stories that shock, educate, and spark change, reminding us that behind every headline is a victim, a family, and a ripple effect felt by an entire community. If you find this journey as important as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to ensure you never miss another gripping exploration into the depths of human behavior. On October 22, 2013, Danvers High School in Massachusetts seemed like any other suburban high school. Students rushed to class, teachers graded papers, and the hum of everyday life filled the hallways. But by the time the sun set, the school would become the scene of a gruesome crime that would shock the nation. It all began when 14-year-old Philip Chism failed to return home. His mother, confused and increasingly worried, reported him missing. What she didn't know was that she wasn't the only one looking for a missing person that night. At almost the same time, Colleen Ritzer, a popular 24-year-old math teacher, was reported missing as well. Colleen was known for her kindness, her passion for teaching, and her dedication to helping students. She would never simply disappear. As the hours stretched on, an uneasy tension gripped the town. Where were Philip and Colleen, and why had both vanished at the same time? No one was prepared for the horrifying discovery that would soon be made. At first glance, Philip Chism appeared to be a normal high school freshman. He was quiet, intelligent, and a talented soccer player. But behind his silent demeanor, something much darker was brewing. He had recently moved to Danvers from Tennessee, and according to classmates, he kept mostly to himself. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, and he often appeared to be lost in thought. But nobody saw him as dangerous. Until the night of the murder, security footage from the school would later reveal disturbing details. That afternoon, Colleen Ritzer had asked Philip to stay after class for extra help. Surveillance cameras captured them walking down the hallway, Colleen leading the way, Philip following a few steps behind, his hands buried in his pockets. Then came the footage that sent chills through the spines of investigators. Colleen entered the women's faculty restroom, unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. Seconds later, Philip followed her inside. What happened next was something out of a nightmare. As investigators searched the school and surrounding areas, their worst fears were confirmed. Colleen Ritzer's body was found in a wooded area behind the school. She had been brutally attacked, her throat slashed so deeply that it severed part of her spine. Investigators later determined that she had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. The weapon? A box cutter. Even more disturbing, Philip had attempted to clean up the scene. He had placed her body inside a recycling bin and dragged it through the school, leaving a chilling trail of evidence behind him. Why would a 14-year-old commit such a calculated, cold-blooded crime? Was there something in his past that hinted at this kind of darkness? Philip Chism was found later that night, wandering aimlessly along a highway. His clothes had been changed, but in his backpack, detectives found disturbing evidence: Colleen Ritzer's credit cards, her underwear, and the murder weapon. When he was brought in for questioning, what he said left investigators stunned. "I did it. No hesitation, no emotion, just 3 simple words." Detectives pressed him for more. Why did he do it? What was his motive? His response was just as chilling as his confession. "She made me stay after school." Was this an act of psychosis? Or had Philip harbored violent tendencies long before that afternoon? As Philip's trial loomed, experts were brought in to analyze his mental state. What they found raised disturbing questions about whether he truly understood the severity of his crime. Some experts believed he suffered from undiagnosed schizophrenia, pointing to reports that he heard voices and suffered from violent urges. Others argued that he was fully aware of his actions, that he had planned this attack, brought a weapon, and attempted to cover his tracks. The prosecution wasn't buying the mental illness defense. They pointed to the security footage, the calculated cleanup, and the methodical way he disposed of the evidence. This wasn't the act of someone who had snapped. This was the act of a predator. Was Philip truly mentally ill, or was he simply a killer with no remorse? The day had finally come. After months of grief, unanswered questions, and gut-wrenching anticipation, the trial of Philip Chism was set to begin. The courtroom was filled to capacity. Colleen Ritzer's family sat in somber silence, their faces marked with pain, while Philip's defense team prepared to argue that the young man standing trial was not a cold-blooded killer, but a deeply disturbed teenager incapable of understanding his actions. But the prosecution wasn't going to let that narrative take root so easily. With the opening statements delivered, the evidence began to unfold like a nightmare in slow motion. The prosecution played the chilling security footage, a grainy black and white video of Colleen leading Philip toward the second-floor bathroom, completely unaware that she was walking toward her death. Then came the next frame, Philip following behind, hands buried in his hoodie pockets, his posture eerily tense. Then, the most damning footage of all, Philip dragging a blue recycling bin through the school hallways, Colleen's lifeless body inside. The room fell into stunned silence as the prosecution described how he then wheeled the bin out behind the school, dumped her in the woods, and attempted to cover his tracks. Even Philip's own police interrogation was played in court. His emotionless confession rang through the silent chamber. "I did it. No remorse. No explanation. Just a flat admission that sent chills through everyone who heard it." The defense scrambled to humanize him, painting Philip as a boy tormented by voices in his head, struggling with an undiagnosed mental illness that had driven him to kill. But the prosecution countered, mental illness is not an excuse for a methodical, well-planned crime. This was not an impulsive act. It was premeditated, brutal, and deliberate. The trial had just begun, but already one question loomed over the entire case. Was Philip Chism a victim of his own mind, or was he simply a predator who had finally been caught? Weeks of agonizing testimony had passed. The prosecution had laid out every gruesome detail, while the defense desperately tried to convince the jury that Philip was a boy lost in his own mind. Now it was time. The jury filed back in, their expressions grim. The judge turned to Philip, whose face remained cold, unreadable. No visible fear, no remorse. "Will the defendant please rise?" Philip stood, hands clasped in front of him, his gaze empty. The verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. The words cut through the room like a blade. For Colleen's family, this was justice served, but not nearly enough to fill the void of their loss. Then came the sentencing. The judge's voice was firm, unwavering. "Philip Chism, you are sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Some believed justice had been served, but others felt the sentence was too lenient for the brutality of the crime. 40 years? That meant Philip could still walk free while he was in his 50s, an age when he could still build a life. Even after the verdict, questions still haunted the community. Was this justice? Could any sentence truly compensate for a life stolen so cruelly? The trial may have ended, but for Danvers, the wounds remained raw. Colleen Ritzer wasn't just a victim of a horrific crime. She was a beloved teacher, a friend, and a bright light in the lives of her students. The halls where she once taught were now shadowed with grief. In the weeks following the trial, students and faculty gathered outside Danvers High School for a candlelight vigil. Her former students, many of whom had been in her class just hours before she was murdered, shared memories of her kindness, her laughter, her unwavering belief in them. "She always told us to find the good in people," one student said, voice trembling. "I don't know how to do that after what happened to her." The loss was felt beyond just the school. It was a scar on the town itself. Parents who once felt safe sending their kids to school now held them a little closer. Teachers looked over their shoulders, and students whispered about the nightmare that had unfolded in a place meant for learning. In Colleen's honor, her family created the Colleen Ritzer Memorial Fund, a foundation dedicated to helping aspiring teachers and supporting victims of violence. Her name would never be forgotten, but as the community grieved, one question still lingered in the air, like a haunting echo. Would this tragedy serve as a warning, or would the lessons learned fade, allowing history to repeat itself? Even after Philip Chism was sentenced, a cloud of uncertainty lingered over the case. Why? Why did a 14-year-old boy, who had no prior history of violence, commit such a gruesome, calculated murder? Was he born with something sinister inside him, or had circumstances shaped him into a cold-blooded killer? Psychologists and criminal experts pored over his mental state, desperately trying to understand what had snapped inside him that fateful day. Some pointed to his detachment from reality, the lack of emotion in his confessions, and his calculated efforts to cover up the crime as evidence that he was a budding psychopath, someone who simply lacked empathy from birth. Others speculated that his mind had fractured under some unseen pressure, possibly due to unresolved trauma, repressed emotions, or undiagnosed mental illness. But there were no easy answers. Despite hours of police interrogations, psychiatric evaluations, and courtroom testimony, Philip never revealed what truly drove him to kill Colleen Ritzer that day. His motives remained buried inside his mind, locked away in a place even he might not fully understand. Some experts believed that his silence was intentional, that he was withholding the real reason because he enjoyed the power of mystery, of knowing that no one could fully explain what he had done. Others feared something even darker, that there was no reason at all, that Colleen's murder wasn't a crime born from rage, revenge, or impulse, but simply a chilling, meaningless act of violence committed by someone incapable of caring. The most terrifying realization: if we don't understand what made Philip Chism snap, how can we stop someone else from doing the same? Colleen Ritzer's murder was more than a tragic crime. It was a wake-up call for schools, educators, and parents across the country. Her death forced an urgent conversation about teacher safety, mental health awareness, and the hidden warning signs of violence in students. To honor her memory, Colleen's family and friends launched the Colleen Ritzer Memorial Fund, a foundation dedicated to helping aspiring teachers, ensuring they have the resources and training they need to educate the next generation, providing support for victims of violence, particularly in educational settings, raising awareness about mental health issues in young people, because prevention starts with understanding. Her story became more than just a news headline. It became a lesson, one that schools across the country took seriously. More teachers were trained in recognizing early warning signs of violence. School security measures were reevaluated. Conversations about student mental health became more frequent and urgent. But despite all these efforts, one chilling question remained. How do we stop something like this from happening again, when the people capable of such acts don't look like monsters? When they sit in our classrooms, walk our hallways, smile at us in the morning, all while harboring the kind of darkness no one can predict. As long as that question remains unanswered, the story of Colleen Ritzer will continue to haunt us. Because if we can't identify the warning signs, how do we know who the next Philip Chism will be? Colleen Ritzer's story is one that should have never been written in blood. She was a teacher, a mentor, a friend, someone who dedicated her life to shaping young minds, only to have hers taken away by one of the very students she wanted to help. But her legacy cannot end with sorrow. Her life must serve as a beacon of awareness, a reminder that safety in schools isn't just about locked doors and security cameras. It's about understanding the unseen battle students face, recognizing the warning signs of violence, and ensuring no educator, no student, no innocent soul suffers the same fate. This case exposed something chilling. Monsters don't always come from the shadows. Sometimes they sit quietly in classrooms, blending in, waiting for the moment to strike. So what can we do? Educators must be equipped with the tools to recognize behavioral red flags before it's too late. Students must feel safe enough to report disturbing behavior without fear or hesitation. Mental health resources need to be prioritized in schools, not as an afterthought, but as a necessity. Colleen's voice was silenced, but ours is not. We must continue telling her story. We must fight for safer schools. We must protect those who dedicate their lives to educating the next generation. If you believe in justice for Colleen, if you believe in preventing another tragedy like this, like, comment, and subscribe to keep her memory alive and help spread awareness. Because if we stay silent, if we forget what happened, who will be the next victim?